It wasn't the kind of evening that hinted at chaos. In fact, everything started out perfectly normal. Chloe and I were at Morrison's, a cozy bar we'd frequented since our late 20s. We were there with the usual crowd, a mix of old college friends and a few people Chloe had met through her job. The music played softly in the background as laughter and conversations filled the room. I nursed my whiskey, glancing at Chloe as she chatted with her best friend, Sarah. She looked radiant, as she often did, her confidence drawing people toward her effortlessly. But then, I noticed Andrew. He was one of Chloe's newer colleagues, someone I'd met briefly at a company event last summer. He wasn't doing anything overtly inappropriate, but his posture told a different story. He leaned in slightly as Chloe spoke, his body language a bit too casual, too at ease. Something about it gnawed at me, though I tried to shake it off. Chloe had always been outgoing and charming, and I didn't want to be the kind of husband who overanalyzed every interaction. Later, Sarah asked me to grab her a drink while she went to the restroom. When I returned to the table, something was off. Both Chloe and Andrew were gone, their chairs empty. The hum of conversation around the table continued, but it felt like the spotlight was suddenly on their absence. Did Chloe say where she was going? I asked Evan, an old friend seated next to me. He hesitated, shifting awkwardly. She mentioned needing some fresh air. I think Andrew said he had to take a call or something. Maybe they're both outside. His tone was uneasy, like he wasn't sure how much he should share. My stomach nodded as I set Sarah's drink on the table and stood up. "I'll check on her," I said casually, though my chest tightened with every step toward the patio. The cold air hit me like a slap as I stepped outside. The patio was sparsely populated, just a couple huddled near a heat lamp. I scanned the lot beyond, feeling more ridiculous with each passing second. Was I seriously pacing around for Chloe like some paranoid fool? As I was about to head back inside, my phone buzzed. Her name lit up the screen. I swiped to answer. "Hey, babe," Chloe said, her voice airy, detached. It felt off, like she wasn't the same woman who had kissed me goodbye on her way to work this morning. "You okay? Where are you?" I asked, trying to keep my tone steady. "Oh, I just stepped out for some air. Andrew came out here too. We're just talking. No big deal." "No big deal," I repeated, my voice rising slightly. "You vanished without saying a word." Everyone at the table noticed. Chloe let out a light laugh that made my blood boil. "Relax, Josh. You know I love you, right? Stop being dramatic. I'll be back inside in a second." And with that, she hung up. I stood there, my phone still in hand, the winter air biting through my jacket. For the first time in our 10-year marriage, I felt like I was speaking to a stranger. Chloe returned to the table about 10 minutes later, her demeanor as casual as ever. Andrew trailed a few paces behind her, his hands jammed into his pockets, his eyes darting like a guilty child's. "You cooled off?" Chloe asked as she sat down beside me, her voice laced with faux sweetness. I stared at her, my whiskey untouched in front of me. "Where were you?" She tilted her head, her smile unwavering. "I told you, Josh. I stepped outside for air. Andrew was already there and we just talked. That's all." Her explanation felt rehearsed, calculated. Around the table, no one met my gaze. Sarah focused on her drink while Evan suddenly found his phone fascinating. The silence was deafening. "Talked about what?" I pressed, keeping my tone as neutral as I could. "Work stuff," Chloe said with a shrug. "You know how crazy things have been lately." Andrew shifted uncomfortably in his seat, muttering something about needing another drink before scurrying off to the bar. That was it, the final straw. I leaned in closer to Chloe, lowering my voice. "You're lying," I said, the words sharper than I intended. Her eyes widened, just for a second, before narrowing into a glare. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I said evenly. "Something's not right." "I'm not stupid, Chloe." For a brief moment her mask slipped. Her expression hardened, her jaw tightening as if she were preparing to lash out. But just as quickly, the cold smile returned. "You're being paranoid," she hissed. Then louder, "If you can't trust me, that's on you." I'm done with this conversation. Without another word, she stood, grabbing her coat. Coming, Sarah? She called over her shoulder. Sarah hesitated, glancing at me, then at Chloe. She grabbed her purse and followed. Just like that, Chloe was gone again, leaving me at the table with nothing but unanswered questions and a sinking feeling in my chest. I didn't go straight home after the bar. Instead, I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Anger coursed through me, but beneath it, a darker, colder sensation lingered: doubt. Chloe's behavior wasn't just a one-off. For weeks, maybe months, I'd been brushing aside little things. Her dismissive responses, her newfound late nights at work, and the way her phone seemed to be permanently glued to her hand, screen angled away from me. Tonight, though, she'd crossed a line. Eventually, I drove home. The house felt emptier than usual. Her car wasn't in the driveway, and I didn't even bother calling her. I knew she wouldn't answer. Instead, I went inside, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and sat in the darkened living room. I replayed every detail of the night. Her laugh, Andrew's nervous glances, the way Sarah couldn't even look me in the eye. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, and the only way to find out was to start digging. Chloe's laptop sat on the kitchen counter, its screen half closed as if she'd used it earlier. Normally, I wouldn't invade her privacy, but this wasn't a normal situation. My hands hovered over the keyboard, hesitation and guilt tugging at me. Then, I remembered the smug, dismissive tone she'd used on the phone. That was enough. I flipped the laptop open. It was password protected, of course. Chloe wasn't exactly a fortress of secrecy, though. Her password had been the same for years, our dog's name, Luna, followed by the year we got her. I typed it in, and the screen unlocked. Her browser history was clean. Too clean. There were no signs of her usual online shopping or recipe searches. No social media logins or work-related links. It was like someone had wiped the slate clean. Suspicious, I opened her email. At first, everything looked normal. Promotional emails, bills, and the usual newsletters. But then a name caught my eye. Andrew. He'd sent her an email earlier that evening, just 2 hours before we left for the bar. The subject line was innocuous, quick question. But the content made my blood run cold. Can't stop thinking about last night. When can we talk again? Let me know. I stared at the screen, disbelief numbing my thoughts. Last night? What the hell had happened last night? My pulse hammered as I scanned through more emails. But there was nothing else from Andrew. Still, the damage was done. That one message had already ripped a hole in the foundation of our marriage. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway jolted me from my thoughts. I slammed the laptop shut and shoved it back onto the counter. Moments later, Chloe walked through the door. She didn't look at me right away, just kicked off her heels and set her purse on the entryway table. "You're up late," she said, her tone neutral, almost dismissive. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She froze for a split second, then turned to face me, her expression carefully neutral. "I went to Sarah's place. We needed to talk." "About what?" "About work, about life, everything." "Why?" Her tone was steady, but I could see the slight tension in her posture, the way her hand tightened around the strap of her purse. "Because you've been acting different, Chloe. And I don't believe you." Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, her mask slipped. "What exactly are you accusing me of, Josh?" I stood, the weight of the email heavy on my mind. "I'm accusing you of lying to me. About tonight. About Andrew. About whatever the hell happened last night." She blinked, then let out a bitter laugh. "Andrew? Is that what this is about?" "Josh, he's just a coworker. You're reading into things that aren't there." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Then explain this." I opened the laptop and turned the screen toward her, the email from Andrew still up. Her expression changed instantly. Panic flickered across her face before she quickly masked it with anger. "You went through my laptop? Are you serious right now?" "Don't deflect," I snapped. "What happened last night?" "Nothing," she shouted, throwing her hands up. "God, Josh, you're paranoid. Andrew's just a friend, nothing more. Friends don't send emails like this. I shot back, pointing to the screen. Friends don't say they can't stop thinking about last night. She crossed her arms, her jaw tightening. You're blowing this out of proportion. He's going through a tough time, and I was being supportive. That's all. My laugh was bitter and humorless. Supportive? Chloe, do you even hear yourself? What kind of support were you giving him that he's so desperate to talk to you again? Her face flushed, her hands trembling slightly. I'm not doing this with you right now, she said, grabbing her purse. If you can't trust me, then that's your problem, not mine. She turned and stormed upstairs, leaving me standing in the middle of the kitchen with the laptop still open. I didn't follow her. Instead, I poured myself another drink and sat back down in the living room, staring at the email on the screen. The weight of it all was suffocating, but one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, Chloe was back to her usual self, or at least that's what she wanted me to think. She hummed softly as she made coffee, scrolling through her phone with her back to me. Every so often, she glanced over her shoulder, as if checking to see if I was watching. I didn't say anything. I just sat at the table, sipping my coffee, trying to piece together my thoughts. She finally broke the silence. I've got a meeting after work today, she said casually. Might run a little late. I raised an eyebrow but didn't respond. Chloe hated silence, especially when it came from me. Sure enough, she turned around, her eyes narrowing slightly. What? You don't believe me? I set my mug down, leaning back in my chair. I didn't say anything. You didn't have to, she snapped, crossing her arms. You've been giving me that look all morning. What look? That, I'm judging you but pretending I'm not look, she said, her tone sharper than she probably intended. I chuckled bitterly. I guess I have a lot to judge lately. Chloe's jaw tightened, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she grabbed her coffee and headed for the door. I'll be home late, she called over her shoulder as she left. The moment I heard her car pull out of the driveway, I moved. I went straight to the kitchen, grabbed her laptop, and started searching again. If there was one incriminating email, there had to be more. Her inbox, however, was just as clean as before. I scrolled through every folder, checked her sent messages, and even looked for deleted emails. But there was nothing. It was as if she'd wiped everything. I was about to give up when I noticed something, an auto-login for her cloud storage. My heart raced as I clicked it. Photos, documents, and videos filled the screen. Most of it looked innocent at first. Work presentations, old pictures of vacations, even a few videos of us together from years ago. But then, buried deep in one of the folders, I found a subfolder labeled Personal. It was password protected. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Chloe wasn't exactly creative when it came to passwords. I tried a few guesses, our dog's name, her birth year, and even her mother's maiden name. Nothing worked. Finally, I tried the most obvious choice. My name followed by our wedding anniversary. The folder unlocked. Inside were a series of photos, most of them selfies. But these weren't normal selfies. In one, Chloe was in a hotel room I didn't recognize. Her hair tousled and her smile brighter than I'd seen in years. In another, she was sitting on a balcony, a glass of wine in hand, her phone angled to capture the sunset. And then there were the texts, screenshots of conversations with Andrew. One stood out immediately. Andrew, I wish you didn't have to leave last night. That dress was killing me. Chloe, you're trouble, you know that? Winky face. Andrew, only for you. I stared at the screen, my stomach churning. The timestamps were recent, less than a week ago. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the rest of the folder. There were more photos, more screenshots, more proof that whatever was happening between Chloe and Andrew wasn't just in my head. By the time Chloe got home that evening, I was waiting for her. She walked through the door, smiling as if nothing had happened. But the moment she saw me standing in the kitchen, her smile faltered. "What's with the look?" she asked, her tone cautious. I held up her laptop. "We need to talk." Her eyes darted to the screen, then back to me. You went through my stuff again? Cut the crap, Chloe, I said, my voice cold. I know. Know what? She said, crossing her arms. But I could see the panic creeping into her expression. I opened the folder and turned the screen toward her. This, all of this. For a moment, she said nothing. Her eyes scanned the screen, her face pale. Then, she let out a bitter laugh. Unbelievable. You invade my privacy and expect me to explain myself. Yes, I said sharply. I expect you to explain why you've been sneaking around with Andrew. Why you've been lying to me for weeks. Her shoulders slumped slightly, and for a second, I thought she might actually come clean. But instead, she straightened, her jaw tightening. It's not what you think, I scoffed. Really? Because it looks like you've been having an affair. Chloe shook her head, her voice rising. I haven't. Andrew and I are just friends. Those messages don't mean anything. Don't insult me, I snapped. You've been lying to my face, sneaking around, hiding things. You expect me to believe this is all just some harmless misunderstanding. Her hands trembled as she grabbed the laptop from me and slammed it shut. You're paranoid, Josh. This is why I can't talk to you about anything. You blow everything out of proportion. I took a step closer, my voice low and steady. Then prove me wrong. Tell me the truth. For a moment, she looked like she might break. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and her lips trembled. But then, just as quickly, she hardened again. You don't want the truth, she said quietly. You just want to be right. She turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the kitchen, the laptop still in my hands. My chest ached with the weight of what had just happened. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to stop until I knew everything. The tension in the house was unbearable. Chloe and I barely spoke over the next few days, each interaction loaded with unspoken accusations and forced civility. She spent more time at work, or at least that's what she claimed, and I spent more time digging, desperate to uncover the full extent of her lies. I started tracking her movements. I hated myself for doing it, but I couldn't trust her anymore. She had turned her phone's location off, so I couldn't use the family sharing app to see where she was. But there were other ways. I called in a favor from an old college friend, Derek, who worked in IT security. He set up a program on her laptop that synced to her phone whenever it was connected to the same Wi-Fi. It wasn't perfect, but it gave me access to some of her messages and emails in real time. The first few days yielded nothing unusual. Most of her texts were with coworkers or friends, and her emails were standard work correspondence. It was almost enough to make me second-guess myself, almost. Then, late one evening, a message popped up on the program, and everything changed. Andrew, looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. Same place. Chloe. Yes, can't wait. Smiley face. My chest tightened as I stared at the screen. Tomorrow. Same place. It didn't take a genius to figure out what that meant. I clenched my fists, my mind racing. Whatever same place was, I was going to find out. The next day, Chloe left the house around noon, claiming she was meeting a friend for lunch. I followed her at a distance, my heart pounding in my chest. She drove across town to a small boutique hotel, the kind of place you'd never notice unless you were looking for it. My stomach churned as I parked down the street and watched her walk inside. She was dressed casually, but there was an ease in her stride, a lightness that I hadn't seen in months. It was as if she was stepping into another life. I waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, Andrew arrived. He stepped out of a sleek black car, dressed sharply in a tailored jacket. He glanced around briefly before heading inside, his phone in hand. I gritted my teeth, every nerve in my body screaming at me to confront him. But I held back. I needed proof. I gave them an hour. It was the longest 60 minutes of my life. Then I got out of my car, walked to the hotel, and approached the front desk. Excuse me, I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel. My wife checked in earlier, but I can't remember the room number. Could you help me out? The receptionist hesitated, her eyes narrowing slightly. What's the name? Chloe Harris, I said, my voice steady. She typed into her computer, then looked up. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't give out that information." I nodded, pretending to understand. "I totally get it. Could you just call her room and let her know I'm here?" She hesitated again, but eventually picked up the phone. "There's no answer," she said after a moment. "Maybe she's not in the room right now." I clenched my jaw. "Thanks anyway." As I walked away, I caught sight of the elevator. I didn't know what floor they were on, but I didn't care. I stepped inside and hit every button, riding up and down as I listened for any sign of them. It felt like an eternity before I heard voices on the third floor. Andrew's voice, low and casual, drifted down the hallway. I followed it, staying just out of sight. They were standing outside one of the rooms, laughing softly. Chloe's hand rested on Andrew's arm as she said something I couldn't make out. He responded by brushing a strand of hair from her face, and she smiled. A smile I hadn't seen in months, full of warmth and familiarity. I snapped a picture with my phone. It was shaky, but clear enough. Proof. My hands shook as I watched them step back into the room, the door clicking shut behind them. I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or punch a hole in the wall. When I got back to my car, I sent the picture to myself, then called Derek. "I've got what I need," I said, my voice hoarse. "Now what?" "You confront her," Derek said. "But be smart about it. Don't let your emotions control you." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Thanks, man." I drove home, my mind spinning with every possible outcome of the confrontation. By the time Chloe walked through the door later that evening, I was ready. "Hey," she said, her tone cheerful as she set her bag down. "How was your day?" I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out my phone and held up the picture. Her face fell instantly, her eyes widening as she stared at the screen. "What's this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You tell me," I said coldly. Her lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time in weeks, Chloe looked genuinely afraid. And for the first time, I felt like I was finally in control. Chloe stood frozen, her eyes darting between the photo on my phone and my face. The silence stretched, heavy and oppressive, until she finally forced out a weak laugh. "This?" she said, her voice trembling. "Josh, it's not what you think." "Then what is it, Chloe?" I shot back, my tone cold and steady. "What exactly am I looking at here?" She hesitated, her hands twisting nervously. It's nothing. We just met to talk about work. That's all." "Work?" I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief. "You expect me to believe you booked a room at a hotel for work? Do you think I'm that stupid?" Her face flushed, and she took a step back, as if trying to create space between us. "I didn't book the room. Andrew did, and I wasn't in there for long. We were just going over some project details, I swear." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You're still lying, Chloe. Do you even hear yourself? What kind of project requires you to sneak off to a hotel in the middle of the day?" Her hands balled into fists at her sides, her mask of calm beginning to crack. "I'm not sneaking around. You're just paranoid, Josh. You've always been like this, always looking for something to accuse me of. Don't you dare turn this around on me," I said, my voice rising. "This isn't about me being paranoid. This is about you lying over and over again." Tears welled up in her eyes, but whether they were from guilt or anger, I couldn't tell. "You've been spying on me," she said, her voice shaking. "Going through my things, following me. How do you think that makes me feel?" "How do you think I feel, Chloe?" I countered, my voice hardening. "Knowing that the woman I've spent 10 years of my life with has been hiding things from me. That she's been meeting another man behind my back." Her jaw tightened, and she looked away, refusing to meet my eyes. "It's not what you think," she repeated weakly. I stepped closer, my phone still in hand. "Then tell me, Chloe. Tell me exactly what it is. Explain why you were at that hotel with Andrew. Explain the emails, the texts, the pictures. I'm giving you one last chance to be honest." For a moment, I thought she might actually come clean. Her shoulders slumped, and her lips trembled as if she were about to speak. But then, Just as quickly, her expression hardened. "I don't owe you an explanation," she snapped. "If you can't trust me, that's your problem, not mine." My patience snapped. "You're right, Chloe," I said, my voice ice cold. "I don't trust you, and I don't think I ever will again." She flinched as if I'd struck her, but I didn't care. I was done playing her game. "I want you out of this house," I said, crossing my arms. "Pack your things and leave. Tonight." Her eyes widened in shock. "Josh, you don't mean that." "I mean every word," I said firmly. "You made your choice when you decided to lie to me. Now, I'm making mine." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and for the first time, I saw real panic in her eyes. "Please, Josh," she whispered. "Don't do this. We can work through this. I'll explain everything. Just give me a chance." I shook my head, my resolve unshaken. "You had your chance, Chloe. I asked for the truth and you gave me nothing but lies. There's nothing left to work through." She stood there for a long moment, her tears falling silently. Then, without another word, she turned and walked upstairs. I heard drawers opening and closing, the rustling of clothes being stuffed into a bag. When she came back down, she was holding a small suitcase, her face pale and tear-streaked. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I never meant for it to get this far." I didn't respond. Couldn't. I watched as she opened the door and stepped outside, the cold night air swallowing her as she disappeared into the darkness. The house was silent after she left, the weight of her absence settling over me like a heavy blanket. For a moment, I felt a pang of regret, a voice in the back of my mind whispering that maybe I'd been too harsh. But then, I remembered the photo, the emails, and the lies. This wasn't my fault. She'd made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. I sat down on the couch, staring at the empty room around me. My chest ached with a mix of anger, betrayal, and sadness. But one thing was clear. This was only the beginning. There was still so much I didn't know, and I wasn't going to stop until I had all the answers. The next morning, the house felt eerily quiet. Chloe's absence was a gaping void, but it wasn't the kind that brought relief. It was the kind that left behind a storm of questions and doubts. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold. My mind replayed every moment from the night before, dissecting her words, her expressions, her lies. It wasn't enough. I needed closure, something definitive. If Chloe wasn't going to give me the truth, I'd find it myself. I called Derek again, this time explaining everything in detail. The emails, the texts, the hotel. He didn't ask unnecessary questions, didn't pass judgment. "Give me a couple of hours," he said. "I'll see what I can dig up." While I waited, I paced the house, restless and on edge. My phone felt like a ticking time bomb in my pocket, each notification jolting my nerves. Finally, just after noon, Derek called back. "You were right," he said, his tone grim. "There's a lot more going on here." "What do you mean?" I asked, gripping the phone tightly. "Andrew's not just a coworker," Derek continued. "I looked into him, pulled some public records. He's been divorced twice, both times due to infidelity. And get this, he's been staying at that hotel you mentioned for weeks. Paid for it in cash. No paper trail." My blood ran cold. "So, he's done this before." "Looks like it," Derek said. "But there's more." I managed to get into Chloe's cloud account again. There are more messages between them. They've been meeting regularly for months. And some of those conversations... He trailed off. "What?" I demanded. "Just tell me." "They're explicit," Derek said bluntly. "There's no room for interpretation, Josh. She's been having an affair." His words hit like a punch to the gut. I'd suspected it, even prepared myself for it, but hearing it out loud was different. It made it real. "Send me everything," I said quietly. "All of it." "Are you sure?" Derek asked, his voice cautious. "I'm sure." An hour later, my inbox pinged with Derek's email. Attached were dozens of screenshots. Texts, emails, even photos of Chloe and Andrew together. Some were harmless at a glance. A selfie at a restaurant, a casual picture of them laughing. but others left no doubt. There was one of them on a bed, their faces close together, and another of Chloe wearing a dress I'd never seen before, her smile brighter than I'd seen in years. I scrolled through the evidence, each image and message cutting deeper than the last. By the time I finished, my hands were trembling with a mix of anger and heartbreak. Chloe hadn't just lied to me. She'd betrayed everything we'd built together. I didn't know what my next move would be, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't just move on and pretend it hadn't happened. I needed her to face what she'd done. That evening, Chloe called. I stared at the phone, her name lighting up the screen, before finally answering. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice cold. "Josh, please," she said, her tone desperate. "Can we talk? I need to explain." "There's nothing to explain," I said flatly. "I know everything, Chloe. I have proof." There was a long pause on the other end, and then a soft, choked sob. "I didn't want it to happen," she said. It just did. I was lonely, Josh. I felt like you didn't see me anymore." "And that's your excuse?" I snapped. "You destroy our marriage because you felt lonely? Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I know," she whispered. "I know I messed up, but I didn't mean to hurt you. I still love you." Her words felt like a slap. "You don't get to say that," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Not after everything you've done." "Josh, please," she begged. "I'll do anything to fix this. Just tell me what to do." I let out a bitter laugh. "You think this can be fixed? You think we can just go back to how things were? Chloe, you didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice. Over and over again." She didn't respond. The silence on the line was deafening, and for a moment, I thought she'd hung up. Then finally she spoke. "I'll leave," she said quietly. "If that's what you want, I'll leave for good." I didn't answer right away. The thought of her leaving, really leaving, filled me with a mix of relief and sorrow. But I knew there was no other way forward. "Do what you want," I said finally. "You already have." I ended the call and sat there in the silence, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I didn't know what the future held or how I'd move past this, but one thing was clear. This chapter of my life was over, and as painful as it was, I knew it was the only way to start again. The days after Chloe left felt like wading through a fog. The house, once filled with the sounds of her laugh, her footsteps, even her humming as she went about her day, now felt hollow. At first, the silence was suffocating, amplifying every thought and emotion I tried to push aside. But as the days turned to weeks, I started to appreciate it. The quiet was healing in its own way, allowing me to focus on what came next. I threw myself into work, into hobbies I'd neglected for years, and into reconnecting with old friends. Derek stopped by a few times, always checking in without prying. He'd helped me uncover the truth, but he never pushed for details, understanding that some wounds needed space to mend. Chloe called a few more times after she left. First, I ignored her. What was there to say? But one night, weeks later, after a few too many drinks, I picked up. "Josh," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry." "You've said that before," I replied, my tone even. "It doesn't change anything. I wanted to tell you that I've started therapy," she said. "I'm trying to figure out why I did what I did. I know it doesn't fix things, but I thought you should know." I closed my eyes, the words hanging in the air. "I hope it helps," I said finally. "For your sake." "Do you think?" She trailed off, her voice breaking. "Do you think there's ever a chance for us to fix what's broken?" The question hung between us, heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. I took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "Chloe, I think we were broken long before Andrew came into the picture. What you did didn't just hurt me. It showed me how far apart we'd grown. I don't think we can come back from that." Her sobs were soft, but they hit me like a hammer. "I understand," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." We ended the call, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't the kind of neat ending you see in movies, with tidy resolutions and clear paths forward. It was messy and raw, but it was real. And it was enough. Months passed, and life slowly began to feel normal again. I started going out more, spending time with friends and rediscovering who I was outside of my marriage. There were still moments when the memories crept in. When a song would play, or I'd find an old photo tucked away in a drawer. But those moments didn't break me anymore. They were just echoes of a life I'd left behind. One evening, Derek and I were sitting on the patio, beers in hand, watching the sunset. He looked over at me and grinned. "You seem lighter," he said. "Like you've finally let go." I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, I guess I have." He raised his bottle in a toast. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," I echoed, clinking my bottle against his. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. And for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that.